So I would like to talk a bit about kind of what innovation means to me and why, how we can actually make this tangible and what we need in order to get there. Often I think in corporates and bigger companies, but I will talk about Telecoms today. We are coming from a very comfortable spot, right? The telco industry is a rich industry. Has been working very well for the last, years, decades. And if you are in such a comfortable spot, it's really hard to think about true innovation. And when I say true innovation, what I mean by that is step change, right? And I will talk about the difference between optimization and I call it step change, as the innovation term has been really overused, I feel, in the last years. It's really hard to get into that mindset, into that space, because it has been working really well for the last years. And it is, you are in that comfortable spot. So why change? But I think it's important to find that time to realize that if you don't change now, if you don't radically change now, it's going to be really hard for you to survive. And it's that drastical and that I put it that strongly on purpose, right? Because I truly feel this way. Now, there has been a really nice presentation that I really liked from CB Insights. And if you go on to the next slide, you will see one of the very thought-provoking series, one of the thought-provoking questions. It's a presentation from 4 years ago, but it really holds true today still. And it is a question towards, if you look from today towards the past, to the big companies that all of a sudden vanished from the ether, right? Because the world was moving on, new companies were coming along. So the question then, looking backwards, was, how did you go bankrupt, right? So how did you vanish? And then if you click on the next slide, you see the answer, which is there's two ways, right? It's first gradually, and then it's suddenly, right? And I thought that was really, really interesting to think about that, because if you are in that comfortable spot, whether as an industry fully or as a company, and you've been doing so well, when is the right time to realize that you are in that gradual descent? Because at one point, it will just suddenly happen if you don't do anything about it. So on the next slide, I want to show you a company. And the question is, it's 3 slides that we go through. And the question is, which company is this, right? And you could see in the very beginning, it's a very simple graph, right? Obviously, you see the time scale over the years and kind of the evaluation of that company and the performance of that company. And you could see a typical graph really, performing well, going high. So this means the company, really was doing well in the market. And it looked very promising, right? So again, a very comfortable spot to be in. And if you click on the next slide, you see there is a gradual shift downwards, but it's over 21 months. It's almost 2 years, where gradually, with little ups and downs, you could also say, well, it might be a hiccup, maybe it's not that bad, etc. Right? So over these 2 years, there's this gradual shift downwards, and as a company, if you are not realizing you are in that downward spiral or in that downwards movement with your performance, then the next slide happens where you see all of a sudden, within 5 months, there was a huge drop in performance. And from there on, you could see, it kind of fades out. And in the end, the company was dead, right? So I think there's a few examples of companies that we can think of from the past, big companies where this happened to. But this is a typical one we often use as examples. I think many of us, if you click on the next slides, you see the it's Blockbuster, right? And there was this quote from the CEO, from the former CEO of Blockbuster at that point in time, saying, neither Redbox nor Netflix are even on the radar screen in terms of competition, right? They were in this very sweet spot of, this is the business we do, and it works, right? There is no other, big threat really. And I think what has happened here is that the company lost sight of thinking about what's good for the customer, but more thinking about what's good for me as a company. And we do this today still, right? We have all these examples, but we do this today still. And I think another really important takeaway from this quote or from this story is that I think we need to understand who are our competitors really. So in telco, if I ask other people, so who are your competitors? They would name the typical big telco companies, right? And maybe some newer ones coming up, but it would always be a very clear number of companies in the telco space that they would name as their competitors. Now, if you ask me, and I'm coming from outside of telco before, right? My expertise is in digital. So me coming in, looking at that, I very quickly, I was a bit irritated by this, I have to say, because what we are trying to do is within telco, we are trying to get the attention of the customer, right? That's what we're all fighting for, right? And we want to have engaged customers, and we want to have their eyeballs, right? So their attention, really. And when I think of this, the true competitors are actually the ones that are on our phones, right? So because that's where our customers spend their time, spend their lives with, right? We do the same. Whenever I don't know, there is nothing to do or it's boring, you would fetch your phone and just browse through it, right? Whenever you go somewhere, you would have your phone with you, etc., right? So you communicate through that, but you also spend a lot of time with the phone 24/7. And I hope some of you are spending less hours with it, but I know it's a lot, right? For many of us, or for all of us. So that's the place where I want to be as a company if I want your attention, if that's my goal. And that's where also your competitors are, right? We cannot always think so narrowly only about our own industry, because what we're competing for is way beyond that, right? So I thought that was quite a relevant and important takeaway from this quote, but also from the way of thinking about innovation, because you cannot only stay in your lane if you want to radically change something. And I think in the telco business, I feel often are missing that sense of urgency. If you click onto the next slide, when I say sense of urgency, what I mean by this is realizing where we are on that graph. And I think we're very clearly on that gradual part of the graph, right? We have to be really careful not to turn into, and I put it drastically, but because I feel this way, not to turn into a utilities company very soon, right? Because what is it that we are actually delivering to the customer that's relevant, and how can we actually get their attention? And in my humble opinion, that will have to be, moving further than just our core products. And I feel I have that sense of urgency very strongly. I feel it very strongly, but I know that many aren't, because it's a very comfortable spot to be in. Now, having said that, I guess the question is really, how do you, if you understood that, and if you have that sense of urgency, how do you now move on, and how do you think about change as such, whether that's optimizing something that's existing or whether that's a true step change? If you click on the next slide, I would like to talk to you about two different ways of thinking or two different strategies for that. And the one is called past forward and the one is called future back. Now, as the names already indicate, in the past forward thinking or in that strategy, you look at what has happened in the past and you bring it forward to today. What I mean by that is, as an example, very typical, and this happens everywhere, very typical budget planning. You look at your last year's performance and your last year's budget. You take it into this year, you add a few percentage points because you want to optimize things, you want to make things a bit better. But you take something and you just make it a bit better. And that's not good or bad. It's just a way of thinking and a way of planning. Now, on the other hand, there is this future back thinking. With this strategy, you look at or you think about, where do I want to be? What do I want to be known for? Disregarding what has happened in the past, which is quite hard, by the way. And then really trying to reimagining something new for you and your business. And you take that vision, that idea, and then you think about, okay, how do I get there? So you take the future, the thought about how can I look in the future, or how will I look in the future, and then go back and plan it out from there. The one is not better than the other. And I truly believe that they actually complement each other and they have to happen in parallel. What I mean by this is that you can imagine, the past forward thinking is keeping your operations, your daily business stable, right? You want your teams to actually deliver the benefits that they have signed up for, right? And not just go, we're just, trying out stuff and innovating and we cannot commit to anything, right? You want to keep that stable, to keep your full customer base stable and serve them, to keep a certain continuity. And so I kind of imagine this as a big tanker like a big ship in the sea that's really, going stable, going straight ahead. Now, in parallel, you would want to build up a team that's separate from that other team that looks at the future, that uses the future back thinking. You can kind of imagine this as a speedboat right next to the big tanker. It's very easy to steer, to adjust the course of that speedboat. And with that, you would really try things out. And when I mean trying things out, if you click on the next slide, it really goes into that test and learn mentality, test and learn logic. Now, you might be already tired of test and learn as an expression. I'm not sure about this, but definitely I've heard it quite a lot in the past. What does it truly mean if I really want to test and learn stuff and use experiments to understand where I want to go? Test and learn, if you look at the picture that's up there, is actually put in three logics, right? You start with assumptions, right? That's kind of how you get into the circle. You have a certain hypothesis about this is something that a customer could like, whether it's a product or a feature or a certain service. And then you would build it. But you would build it in what we call an MVP, right? So a minimum viable product, which means that it's a product that will work on its own, but it's not a full-fledged, it's not a perfect solution, because that will take too much time and too much money, and you wouldn't know whether that's actually going to work. But that's how we have been working in telco for I don't know how many years. We've just built something for, I don't know, all these big IT projects, right? 2 years, 3 years, longer than that, and then it goes live. But it might already be out of date or just not, fit for purpose. So you build something that you can test with customers. You make experiments. And when you do that, obviously there's a risk to it, right? And that risk, obviously you want to reduce it, but you do want to get the outcome. So the way to do it is to take your customer base and take a small chunk of it and test with them. many companies use focus groups, etc., right, to test certain features and things and products with them. I don't believe in that, because if you pay someone to give you an opinion, that might already taint it. On the other hand, if you ask a customer, would you like to use this product? They might say, oh, yeah, I think I like it. I think that's a good idea. I would use it. But that doesn't mean that they will actually use it. Because it's very different to get into people's habits, right? Even if they genuinely think it's a great idea, it doesn't mean that they will be able to incorporate into their lives and actually make use of it. So that's why I'm super pushy on using real customers, right? But you want to do that with a small group of customers to reduce the risk, because if something goes wrong, if it fails, it's contained, right? You can work with that more easily. Now, so you test and experiment with this group of customers, right? That you kind of singled out from the rest, and you get feedback from them, right? That's the measure part. So this means that's when we talk about, we get the data, right? You put metrics in place. You can see their behavioral pattern. You can see, I don't know, their click rates, etc. So you understand very easily, without even talking to them, very easily, is that something that works for them or not, right? And then if you can add more qualitative feedback into this, but it's very easy to get feedback, understand what I've built, is that actually accurate and helpful? And with that, you then learn from that data and understand what is it that I have to change in my product or my service or my offering, and then bring it back into the build part and change it up. And then that goes in a cycle, right? So you would always test and learn as you go throughout. Now, I think that all sounds plausible, but what does it mean? Test and learn culture, and to create that habit means that you will fail eventually, right? If you do, 100 experiments, in a few months, it means that there will be a few that will fail. So it is super important to establish that culture of failure. And that sounds very easy, and many big companies talk about, oh, we have a failure culture. No, often you don't. Right? You don't, because you're pushing and pressing for the numbers to turn up at the end of the quarter, etc. So how can I actually create that failure culture? And I think it's really about being very clear in your communication. This is probably the most important bit internally, to talk about. Let me give you examples of where I have failed, right? As a manager. Let me, give you example of the past where we have failed and we have learned from that. So I think these are really important things to do and to work on. And in the end, it's important to provide value to the customer, not just to me as a company. And I think often we kind of forget that a bit. And we just build stuff because we can or we want to. But the actual question is, should we build it? Is that something that the customer will use and want? And with that question, or with this test and learn logic, obviously you will fail eventually, but that will only bring you towards the step change that I think is important. If you move on to the next slide, and then I think that's my last slide to really talk you through kind of that thoughts. And if you have any questions, please, let me know, let us know, because I think it's easy to talk about these high level bits, but how do you really get into the doing? Now, I want to end this with the 3 horizons of innovation. This kind of goes back to, there's this McKinsey concept of these 3 horizons. But taking this a bit further, I like this one I saw some time ago. And it just means that there are 3 horizons of 3 horizons that are happening in parallel. And if you think about innovating and about the future, they all have a place or a space in the future. And this is what I meant earlier, where with a big tanker and the speedboat, right? Things have to happen in parallel in order to really work, I believe. And there is the business as usual, the red line, that at one point, is at its peak, and it's working really well, but eventually will lose its relevance. And the moment this is kind of going down, and you realize it's losing its fit for purpose or its relevance, you have to, in parallel, think about the green one, which is the viable future, right? They cross at one point, but in order to get to that future and to get to to not end up like the Blockbuster example we had in the very beginning, you need that blue line in the middle as a transition period, where you really work on true innovation. And when I say true innovation, I said this earlier, for me, I call this step change, because it moves away from just taking something existing and making it a bit better, but really looking into the future of what is it that I want? Where do I want to be? And then go backwards from there. And as much as you can, start with a blank sheet of paper. And there are different ways to do it. But I do believe that having these streams in parallel and having different teams focusing on it is probably the best way in terms of risk and output or outcome for such big companies. So let me know if there are any questions.
So thank you. Really interesting, Sarah. Just how much where you've been frames how you think. I think one of my favourite examples of that is that the early cars all look like horse-drawn carriages without the horses. And it took people a while to realise that actually it wasn't just a horse-drawn, with minus the horse, and a complete rethinking of the design and aerodynamics, and But that always really makes me laugh. And that also, probably in 1900 or maybe a bit earlier, if you'd have asked what would make such a difference to transport, people would probably have said cheaper hay or horses that eat less. Yeah. So I think that kind of reframing, instead of being so incredibly influenced by where you've come from, is really, and we all do it much more than we realise, I think. So
and I think it's very hard to be in this space, because I can already hear all these voices from the big telcos or the big companies, saying, we also have a lab, and they test and learn stuff. But it's disconnected, right? I guess the question is that you have to ask yourself, where do I want to be in the future, right? Of course, you can test and say, that's what everybody else, right? Oh, of course, I can add some smart home products, right? That's really cool. That will bring engagement with the customer. And it's close to the telco logic, to the products. It's a bit something new, but yes. But is that really innovation? Is that really something that will move the needle for you? Or is that something to keep you alive for the next few years? And I think that it's so important to think about, what is it that I want for my future? And it doesn't need to be a clear product, but it could be, as I said earlier, I want to have a good relationship with my customer. I want to have a constant conversation. For example, that could be something, that's what I call customer attention or engagement. I want that. Well, then think about, how can I get this? Can I achieve this with my core products? Right? And if I cannot, what is something that I can do? And we often talk about, in that space, we talk about the right to play, right? And people are like, but as a telco, do I have the right to play in, I don't know, e-health or education? I don't. Well, do we really think that people that came up with good ideas, I don't know, like a Netflix, like a Tesla, did they really think that they had a right to play in an industry they have not been in before, a fully newbie, and where all these big players are in? No, they don't, right? You create that right to play. So I think it's often very disconnected, and we have these big telco companies. There is a lot of money, but we don't direct it towards true innovation.
If you could do one thing, this is a bit mean, to put you on the spot a bit. If you could just do one thing with that magic wand you've found to improve digital capabilities, telco, what would it be?
I think all lies in the enablers, right? Because the moment you have a basis, like a technology basis, you can do anything, right? You can do a lot of things. So I guess the one thing that I would do is I would start from scratch from a technology perspective, right? Because we all telcos have this huge legacy, right? Whether that's back book, front book problematic, whether that's the different prices we have, whether that's big old back end systems that slow you down. Oh no, you cannot just, because me coming from a digital pure play, if you say, oh, I want to connect with a partner and I want to just open up my, exchange data, it's a couple of days, not even, right? Because you just create a connection, that's it. Now, if you do that with a big legacy, it's probably not even possible. Or if it is, it takes a lot of work and a lot of champions to support you, and then it will take months and years. So I think the legacy technology is really a problem. Now,
sorry.
Yeah. No, go.
I was just going to say, the thing I find fascinating about legacy and how legacy holds us back is I've been writing about telecoms for several decades, should we leave it at that? And legacy is always the problem. But when I started writing about telecoms in the 80s, I mean, it's not the same legacy we've got now, but it's the same reason and it's the same burden and it's the same difficulty. And I keep thinking, well, we keep talking about bringing new systems in that get rid of the legacy, but it just seems to add to the pile.
Yeah. And I think because the way we do it, or we have been doing it, is we have a big legacy and big systems that are not flexible, and we're bringing another big thing in that's new, but it's also not flexible. So I think the golden, how do you say, the truth lies in a flexible tech, which is what many companies use, right? Or especially the ones that are fully digital, so pure plays, or new companies, right? So you do have the possibility to do it. And there are ways around this monolithic structure. But yeah, you have to dare to do it. And if we're very honest, it's really expensive to do it because you have it.
We're getting to it now. I have a question for you, sir, from our audience. What metrics govern your business group, and are they differentiated over time? For example, 1 year and 3 year targets to promote long-term initiatives?
Okay, so for that, I think I have to say that, because you say group, right? I think we have that kind of parallel structure, right? Where we keep the existing and the daily operation stable, kind of the tanker, and then we have that speedboat, right? And there are different metrics in the different areas. I think what is really important for us and really relevant for us is, that's not a specific metric, but structurally, is to work with OKRs, right? Objectives and key results. It's a Google logic. The idea behind it is it differentiates from KPIs in a way that you create an objective that is higher than what you think you can achieve.
Okay.
And that means it gives you a mindset of, this is where I would love to get to. I probably will not get there, but maybe I get to 70%. And only then, you might then be able to reach 80%. I think what we have been doing in the past is focusing on KPIs, where we say, oh, this is what I can achieve. And we play it safe because we know, and it's kind of goes back
so
to the
then your
target
is just to achieve that.
Right. And you don't even have the will or any incentive to do more, right? And it's hard, I believe you have to set your objectives higher. But I know that the corporate cultures are not always working this way because they need certain planning horizons. So it's interesting, but that's what we do. That really helps us. And I think for me personally, in my team, my key metric, or my key, the one bit that I always look after is customer engagement. That's why I mentioned it earlier as well. And customer engagement, I mean, the attention of the customer digitally, whether on your phone or on web, right? So how much time do they spend with us and the quality of the time they spend with us? Typical telco, you have a product and it works and you don't engage as a customer because it works. You only engage if there's a problem. And then we trained our customers to call in, which is really expensive for us.
I know. I have to say, I am baffled in 2022 why telcos need such big call centres. To me, it's one of life's mysteries. I would frankly rather stand on one leg in the snow for 5 minutes with no shoes on than call the call centre. Sarah, we've run out of time. That was fun, interesting, different. Thank you very much indeed.
Absolutely. I hope that was a bit thought-provoking, and thanks for having me.
Delighted. Thank you very much.